Good afternoon, and I really appreciate this opportunity. And a special hello to any of you who are returned Peace Corps volunteers who might be joining today's call. Also, thanks to Andy McKean, returned volunteer from Cameroon and Kenya. And by the way, Andy, I taught English and a little bit of women and children's health when I was a Peace Corps volunteer. And you are a Colorado Foothills World Affairs Council board member, and so thank you. And Program Chair Joe Shaw and President Deb Pierce. Thanks, Deb, and thank you for finishing school so you can do this council presentation with us. I don't know if Ambassador Christopher Hill was able to join, but if he is, I want to do a particular shout out to him because he's been a wonderful long-term Peace Corps champion over many years, and he too was a Peace Corps volunteer in Cameroon. We're here this afternoon to talk about Peace Corps and the importance of people-to-people diplomacy, which is really what the World Affairs Council is all about. And we're going to talk today about COVID and who we are and our future in this age of COVID. Now, I know that several of you are returned Peace Corps volunteers and former staff, so I want to take a few minutes to just talk about who we are as an agency. So as I begin, I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are as an agency before March 15th of this year, because that's when we changed temporarily. But as you all know, and as you see from the slides, the Peace Corps mission is to promote world peace, and friendship through three goals. And this mission and these three goals have been Peace Corps, the heart of Peace Corps, since the beginning of Peace Corps. This was in the original legislation in September of 1961. And these three goals are equal and they are integrated, equal and integrated. So one, we help people of interested countries meet their needs for trained men and women. So this is when we are working in agriculture or English or health or youth development. This is when we are meeting the first goal. But equally important is promoting a better understanding of Americans on the part of people served, and then finally bringing that experience back home. So as we think about what these goals are, because it's the key to why Peace Corps for just about 60 years now has been such a jewel and a treasure globally. So for 59 years, communities around the globe have been impacted by the work of Peace Corps volunteers long after they have departed. Volunteers are assisting communities throughout the world in a variety of ways, including teaching English, which is what I did, working in HIV/AIDS prevention and care. And those of you who know PEPFAR, we work very actively with PEPFAR, and providing advice and instruction on nutrition and food availability issues to mitigate the adverse consequences of the current food security crisis. And we do this as a grassroots, people-to-people form of public service. We are that last mile. We are that last mile that is with the host families, with the communities, and with community counterparts. I have talked to many leaders of countries, ministers of countries, who have talked about how Peace Corps volunteers started a lot of the work that they do and brought them of age in school. I remember the Prime Minister of North Macedonia talking about the three volunteers when he was mayor of the capital city and how he stays in touch and how important they are to him. And that others, the president of Ecuador, when just a young boy, it was that Peace Corps volunteer that gave him the courage to go to school, stay in school, and become a national leader. Our second goal, which is sharing who we are. And the importance of sharing who we are, it means that we learn the local language, we eat dinner with the family, we live with families, we take children to market. We sit on the porch with the family members and chat. We do things with our counterparts. we become part of that community. And during that, we share who we are as Americans and learn who they are in the communities where we serve. And then finally, goal 3, which now begins when we get on that airplane to go overseas because of all the interconnectivity, that we start sharing back home our experiences while we're volunteers. And so during those 2 years, we're bringing family and friends in the United States into this experience. And what excites me in part about the third goal is that in addition to 7,000 serving volunteers, we have families and friends and colleagues all over the United States. Now we can do today, sharing that experience right from their doorsteps in the United States. Just to give you one quick example, when I was again in North Macedonia, the Peace Corps volunteer said that every Sunday night she Skyped home with her family in Pittsburgh. And she did that once by herself. And then her host mother said, hey, wait a minute, you can't do that by yourself. And so she said, what they do now is that at the dining room table every Sunday night, her host family and her Skype with the family in Pittsburgh. And they have all become very good friends with each other. And in fact, the host family invited the Pittsburgh family to Christmas last year. So it becomes part of who a volunteer is as he shares back home. And then when volunteers return, they live that third goal for the rest of their lives. And I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Now, where we are serving. Now, again, this is up through March 15th of this year. As you see, 142 countries. And we just signed an agreement. We have served in over all our 60 years, 142 countries, and we just signed an agreement to begin a program in Vietnam, which will be the 143rd country. And to say, I'm excited about being able to, after working for 15 years, to be able to go into Vietnam. You see that almost half of our volunteers serve in sub-Saharan Africa, and then the rest of our volunteers serve throughout the world. And this has been pretty standard for most of our years, but I just want to point out that as you see Central and Eastern Europe and Central Asia, since about 1989, 1990, we have had a very strong presence in that part of the world, including Ukraine has often been either the biggest or the second biggest program in Peace Corps. Now, as I mentioned, this is up through March 15th of this year. So that data I was just showing you is 6 months old right now. And as I said, Peace Corps volunteers live and work alongside the people they serve, collaborating with local governments, schools, businesses, and entrepreneurs to create sustainable community-based projects. So our areas, as you see, are 6 general areas. The biggest, of course, is education. But as you look at these areas in which we serve, there's a lot of overlap. So a volunteer who might be in health will actually maybe work in after-school activities and also teach. Or a volunteer in education will do health programs after work. So even though we have the sectors, what volunteers do is pretty holistic in the community where they serve. Now, in addition to our regular 2-year program, we have what we call Peace Corps Response. And it is an opportunity for experienced professionals to undertake shorter term, 3 months to a year, high impact service assignments overseas. And so often our Peace Corps Response are returned volunteers who have gotten additional degrees or have had years of experience and take that opportunity to return to a country and do more technical work than we often do as 2-year volunteers. Now, today, yes, today is a little different, and the fact that we're doing this by Zoom tells you how different we all are. On March 15th, we made the difficult decision, and as I have said to many people, it is the most difficult decision I've ever made in my life, to temporarily suspend all of Peace Corps operations globally and bring everybody home. We brought back over 7,000 Peace Corps volunteers from 61 countries, and we did it in 8 days. Nobody got sick, nobody got lost, and nobody had an accident. It was extraordinary whole of agency response. And it said so much about what Peace Corps is, because that response to get our volunteers out in a week was, we drew on the countries, the counterparts, the embassies, travel groups. In fact, Ethiopian Airlines almost became a private airlines to us because they kept changing their routes and the size of the planes so they could bring back almost half the volunteers from sub-Saharan Africa. Now, the volunteers, because one day you're teaching, the next day you get a text saying you're leaving. To put it mildly, anger, frustration, bewilderment, fear of returning home, no jobs or income, 14 days of quarantine once they arrived in the United States was very, very difficult, has been very, very difficult for the 7,000 returning volunteers. Now, it's interesting that when volunteers return, we want to support, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but we already begin our process of how do we return to service. So we are now in the process of returning to service. First, all of our countries are in place. All of our host country national staff are still in our 61 countries. Most of our US direct hire are in our 61 countries, and they are working with us in Washington to make that return possible. We are fully supported by Congress. We want to have our global presence as soon as we can, probably over this next year, because we don't know quite when that's going to be. The answers, as we know from our experience in the US, the answers to when we return are driven by COVID-19 and the circumstances in individual countries, what the international travel availability is, and regional medical support systems for our volunteers. For example, that we have a few countries where there is no COVID-19, Mongolia, for example, but the reason Mongolia doesn't have COVID-19 is because it's closed. They closed down, and so we can't return there because they're closed. And we have some countries that are still at the beginning of the epidemic. We have others that are working their way for elimination of the epidemic, and we're closer to being able to return. It's interesting because we can't control the disease. Boy, I wish we could, but no, can't control the disease. But we do control our process for return. So that as we're working on our process to return 7,000 volunteers, until the pandemic is fully under control, we need to operate in a different manner than we have before. And the challenge of as a volunteer service are going to differ. When we think about that, the first volunteers that will go back will have to screen much more specifically for health issues to ensure that they're safe and that they're healthy. And depending on what the protocols are in each country, we're going to have to be honoring the COVID protocols of that country. And that will suggest that volunteers might not go back to projects they were doing before. And it might also suggest that we won't have as many volunteers going back in the first few months. We are navigating a world that is in transition. Simultaneously, as each of you know, each of us as individuals are transitioning to our personal connections, to issues of race, social justice, and equity. So as we think about our own return, we need to and want to return to our posts with renewed eyes, renewed clarity of what to serve means, and renewed expectations of ourselves. In the meantime, We know that the evacuations are difficult, emotionally draining experiences for the volunteers. We are grateful to all of our partners in service around the country, for all of you in Colorado and in your parts of Colorado that have helped provide support for our returned Peace Corps volunteers. Also, for our Peace Corps volunteers, we're staying in touch, we're answering questions, and very importantly, all of our returning Peace Corps volunteers have non-competitive eligibility for federal service. And so one of the resources that we're making available is a lot of webinars with other federal agencies to encourage people to hire our returning Peace Corps volunteers and for our volunteers to be reaching out. And it has been one of the greatest joys that I have found in these last few months of the number of federal agencies that are reaching out and saying, we want to hire you. I was just on a call an hour and a half ago, as was Shannon, who's on this call today, with the head of the agriculture program, the Feed the Future program for USAID. And he said, please, it is so important that we as USAID hire the returned Peace Corps volunteers and the ones that are just returning. And he said, can we set up more webinars? Can we reach out to all of you because you are such great employees with USAID? The idea of Peace Corps, the idea that volunteers could serve in their country in the cause of peace by living and working in other countries, struck a chord with thousands in the early 60s, and the enthusiasm continues today. I might note that I was one of those to whom it struck a chord in the 60s, as I was a junior at the University of Utah in 1964. And it was one of the first returning Peace Corps volunteers that spoke for 10 minutes in the sorority when I was a junior that I said, you know, I never thought of that in my life, but I am going to do it. And as it has been for almost 250,000 returned Peace Corps volunteers, it strikes a chord. We must work together to ensure that the mission continues into the future, that volunteers return to the field when it is safe to do so. As I have noted, the pandemic has not only highlighted racial and social economic inequities in our own countries, but the countries abroad where we serve. And we know that, as our host country staff have been saying to us, they're watching the same headlines in the United States as we're watching. And they're also watching their own headlines in their countries. So they're changing as much as we are changing. And with that, it is illustrating our global interconnectedness. And with it, an increased need for people who can effectively and sensitively navigate cross-cultural differences for the purpose of building just and equitable systems and building sustainable peace. This need is what speaks out to Peace Corps' continued relevance. We need to be the best of who we are as individuals in our own diversity and in equity as we go to countries and have those conversations with our communities in those countries about who we are and who they are as an interconnected world. And we do it with all humility. And as much humility, I think, as we've ever had with Peace Corps, because we're now asking permission of countries to return. We're needing to say, countries, we're healthy. We will say to you that we will stay healthy and we will keep you healthy. And we need to humbly ask this and be part of that interactive process as we return. So we take in this pause in the field service, because we're not in the field, as I say, right at the moment, an opportunity to build into our plans a strong, self-aware, and equitable environment for all Peace Corps staff and volunteers. Additionally, in a certain way, The field we face, in the field, we're facing many of the same challenges and opportunities of those in Peace Corps' early years. You know, when I think about, and I read some of Sarge Shriver's letters in 1961, I went to the archives to do so, as to how he was setting up Peace Corps and the number of countries in the first year, the many countries and number of volunteers, several thousand in that first year in 1961 and the first half of 1962. We are this coming year returning to 61 countries at a time. It's a huge job. It's an exciting job, and it's a renewal for all of what we believe. But in that, our core, our mission, and our goals have not changed. We have not changed who we are, but we have changed how we are as we go forward. These changes, we are increasing our focus on programming and training, the development of logic model frameworks to measure our sectors, and our increasing emphasis on monitoring and evaluation of Peace Corps volunteer work. But think about the third goal for a moment. That's when we return. Peace Corps opens doors and changes life, and many of you who are on this call know that personally, not only in the countries and where we serve, but here at home. So thousands of our PCVs are giving back, including in Colorado and across the United States. As many of you know, the University of Colorado and Colorado State Universities are two top recruiters of Peace Corps volunteers in the United States. And Colorado State University was one of the beginning universities for Peace Corps. So Peace Corps' mission is to spread world peace and friendship. And we do it through our technical work, but the cultural exchange moments that happen frequently in service. The building of these relationships, goodwill and understanding between the volunteers and people with whom they work is what helps us foster a global community and a global community here at home. When we talk about Peace Corps as a call to lifelong service, it's not new, but that commitment stays with us all our lives. And we contribute those experiences here at home and everywhere where we continue to serve. An important component of our service when we get home are important as we serve in communities throughout the United States, is helping be part of international exchange and citizens diplomacy. Many of those other important components are represented by organizations and individuals that are here with us this afternoon. High school and college study abroad students are significantly more likely to become Peace Corps volunteers, and they bring extensive language, culture, and intercultural experience that strengthens their Peace Corps work. Likewise, returned Peace Corps volunteers often continue their careers in education and are likely to participate in Fulbright and other related exchange programs. I might note that I ran the Fulbright Senior Scholar Program for 5 years, and I saw firsthand the interconnectivity between faculty who were Fulbrighters and Peace Corps, because many of those Fulbright faculty had become their career as Peace Corps volunteers. So these subsequent exchange programs are enriched by the Return Peace Corps volunteer Peace Corps experience, and they teach, research, and do community work for the rest of their lives. Peace Corps also has, and we've developed over all our years, a lot of educational resources that many of you can use, including in elementary school, junior high, high school, and in college work, and even in community youth work. We've created tools for this work by adapting what volunteers use throughout the world. So these are accessible for neighborhoods, schools, church groups, and communities in Colorado and throughout the United States. And they're fully accessible on the website. For example, one is called Life Skills Manual, which describes the knowledge, attitudes, and skills adolescents need in order to make health decisions that lead to successful transition into adulthood. It's a lot about behavior change for youth. I love the Life Skills Manual. It's broken into 20 and 30-minute exercises, activities for youth, and it's very easy to follow. And I just see a chat comment that one of you has already used that. So these skills that we're teaching in the Life Skills Manual is in communication, decision-making, critical thinking, managing emotions, assertiveness, self-esteem building, resisting peer pressure, leadership skills, relationship skills. And it uses interactive approach, role plays, games, puzzles, group decisions, and other innovative techniques. It is so much fun to use and so easy to use and good for youth everywhere in the world, including here in the US. Another tool that I also love is PACA, Participatory Analysis for Community Action. These are tools that enable communities, whether youth, adults, or other groups, to encourage them to determine their own assets, needs, development priorities, and paths for action. The emphasis is on behavior change, facilitation, gender, intercultural competence, diversity and inclusion, language, and power, and fun to use. I want to give just a quick example of how I used PACA when I was teaching social work at the University of Maryland. That for one of the classes, we used the community mapping program, neighborhood mapping program, for our graduate students that were in community development. That is part of their first course, was they used the PACA guide for community mapping to find the assets in their communities in Baltimore. And all the ways that you sit on stoops and you talk to people and you sit in cafes and you learn assets of a community. This is all taught through the PACA model. And the first part of PACA that makes it so important, even here, as much as it is overseas, is to be present, to listen, and begin to understand what's happening around you. Most importantly, because people want to be heard. And I remember my graduate students, many of whom were also returned Peace Corps volunteers, commenting on going to a barber shop. One student who was at a barber shop and just listened to people for 2 or 3 hours, discovering that that barber shop was a community center, particularly for the men in that particular community in Baltimore. So we always focus on simple ways that we can make a difference. As the individual difference magnifies into larger circles until it influences the community, the nation, and sometimes the world. It is the thousands of small steps that each of us takes that empower and build the resiliency that enable women to take charge of economic, societal, and family betterment for all. It is the thousands of small steps that empower youth, educators, health workers, and community leaders to lead change toward a better world. We do this as Peace Corps volunteers. We continue to do this with all of our friends and colleagues here at home throughout our lives. We are all change agents, person by person, community by community, family by family. This is what makes us strong. This is what makes the difference in our communities, our families, our nation, and the world. Thank you for allowing me to come and join you. I feel very lucky to join you. I'm thinking of all those mountains as I speak, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. I want to invite our guests to write their questions in the chat. And Shannon and Christina, I know when we had our pre-brief, we had a video. Do we have a video to share as participants write their questions?
But what does the man who started the Peace Corps think about it now?
The willingness of all Americans, men and women, young and old, to serve in the Peace Corps, to serve in all parts of the world, to serve at little pay, to do jobs that most of them have never done before, is one of the most encouraging manifestations of the American spirit this country has seen in many years. The Peace Corps gives us a chance to show a side of our country which is too often submerged. Our desire to live in peace, our desire to be of help.
Today, hope endures. In fact, it's as strong as it was when we started our journey in 1961, maybe even stronger. Every day, Peace Corps volunteers and all of us who support them wake up and spend the day working hard to make the world a better place. The larger causes we serve are the farmers in Panama, businesswomen in Albania, students in Rwanda, environmentalists in Jamaica, healthcare workers in South Africa. Our work is manifested in them and the thousands and thousands of others we'll never meet. It's a two-way street. Or, more accurately with Peace Corps, a two-way dirt road or footpath. And that volunteers venture to far-flung corners of the world and bring back to the United States after they serve more knowledge of, compassion for, and ability to ensure peace. They live it, promote it, and never stop sharing it. Peace is the first word of who we are. That our mission and goals haven't changed in nearly 60 years is rare, and so are we. The peace and freedom President Kennedy harnessed then continues now. That spirit still sparks our service. Who are we? We're the Peace Corps.
I hope this spirit will grow, that hundreds of others of young Americans and older Americans will go overseas to show our best side, to show how much we desire to live at peace. There can be no greater service to our country, and no source of pride more real than to be a member of the Peace Corps of the United States. I hope that you will join.
Dr. Olsen, I'm so glad we got to share that video. I want to just give a shout out to all the Peace Corps volunteers who have joined us for this Zoom program today, to thank you and all of them for the noble service that you have provided. And some of the questions that we have, one is just an expression of appreciation for all involved in this organization and the opportunity to participate. And I wonder with that comment, how you might see the future of the Peace Corps and what direction it's taken and how other people may get involved.
Good question. Thank you very much. This is an interesting moment, as I said, because it's a pause for about 9 months of actually not literally serving overseas. But in that is the discovery of the impact that we do have in the requests of countries for us to return. It's when, how, best ways. We're ready. We're ready to have you come. And we have talked to 3 new countries, Vietnam being one of them, saying we want you to come and be part of our program. So the excellent news in going forward is the 3 goals, the work that 250,000 people have done now creates the space for us to continue for another 60 years in that grassroots program. I might note that a couple of changes as we go forward. That one, we do a lot more virtually, and even before March, we were able to have Peace Corps volunteers work more directly with counterparts on technical activities, more with computers, helping teach online English and different kinds of activities that bring our counterparts and our communities into the technical age. And I think we'll be able to do even more with that when we return, because we've made a lot of discoveries in the last 6 months. Also, our programming is very precise now, that we work with our counterparts in thinking about what is the beginning and the middle and an end of a project, and how do we measure that project? What is the difference at the end of that time? And as we do that one-on-one with our counterparts are then training others in how do you look at a project and be able to measure it and measure the impact that it has. So I think we're becoming more technical, not losing goals 2 and 3, because that's the key. So I want to make everybody feel comfortable that goals 2 and 3 are there. But even as we become more technical, it matches what's happening with our counterparts in our communities overseas as their needs are also changing. So I see an excellent future. And with that, just to note that the administration and the Hill are 100% behind us. And they're giving us full budget, even though we don't have anybody right now in the field. They're saying, go back deliberately. What can we do to help? So we're feeling great support from everyone who can help sustain this program.
Thank you. During your presentation, you mentioned the challenges of having to suddenly shut down and be called back home. How is the Peace Corps staying in touch with those volunteers and helping to meet some of those social emotional needs of not being able to actively participate right now?
Well, once the volunteers come home, then they become return volunteers. And so there's certain it's certain amount of limitations as to what our linkages can be. But what we created was what we call a learning space that is special for the volunteers who have come back less than a year, particularly these who had to return in March. And on that learning space, as they come into it, we are offering advice, we're offering not emotional counseling, but we're offering basically job counseling and webinars and courses they can take. We're also, for those who want to come back when we can return in the next few months, we're going to start looking at language lessons and cross-cultural lessons to keep them fully engaged. We also were able to give them some additional health coverage when they came back. And as there is, and we have through our post-health service program to be able to provide emotional and mental health support as they need that support. I want to do a shout out also for the NPCA, the National Peace Corps Association, because they've been helping organize return volunteers all over the United States to provide that kind of support for the returning Peace Corps volunteers.
Deb, I think we have like 5 questions that have come in.
Yeah, thank you, Stan. So one that I see is that, social injustice and inequities have always been an important discussion, but how will the Peace Corps as a whole be creating better and new curricula and volunteer training to address the anti-racism topics that we've seen elevated?
Important. In fact, it's probably among the most important questions that we need to be working with right now. We have set up what we call a task force on diversity and inclusion, racial justice, and racial equity. And we are agency-wide reviewing our own policies and procedures. We are reviewing our training. We're reviewing our orientation to help it be more present with who we need to be in diversity and racial equity. We're reaching out to our to the host country national staff. How are they seeing us? how can they be better, more helpful? How can they rework some of their training now? We're also reaching out and have a whole active team in recruiting more effectively the diversity that represents this country. So we are looking at some of the training changes we're making right from the time we begin to recruit through the entire 2 years of service. And because we're not at post right at the moment, it gives us an extra opportunity to take this very seriously. And as I said, we have a whole of agency task force working on the key recommendations to go forward.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions around how to get involved and where individuals might look if they're considering applying. We're going to include those links on our email to those who've participated. And for those who are still in the chat, you'll see that link there in the chats where you could copy and paste that right now if you wanted to. Several questions, as Stan mentioned, and I'm glad he's watching as they pop up because we want to make sure to get to all of them. Hopefully we can stay on. It's still only 3:51. But one question, kind of interesting, given that the Republican National Convention is taking place this week, is what has President Trump said about the Peace Corps and its future?
The experience that I've had, and I want to give one particular example, is that we have been part of a whole of government effort on women's prosperity, economic prosperity. And as part of that initiative, which we have, as I said, been a very active part, we were able to bring one of our counterparts from Malawi, rural Malawi. I don't think she had even been to Lilongwe, the capital city, before we invited her to the United States. Not only was she invited to the United States with several other women from countries around the world on programs, but she was invited to the White House, and the Peace Corps volunteer who worked with her was invited to the White House. And not only invited to the White House, but we were in the Oval Office when the president did a special signature for the Women's Prosperity, Economic Prosperity Program. And our counterpart from Malawi was invited by the president to speak. And that moment in the Oval Office, that moment with a person from rural Malawi dressed in the dress of Malawi, the wonderful chichingi that they wear there, was such a statement about that support that we have. And that support has been shown all the way through these last 3 years.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much. And it looks like, again, several questions regarding involvement in the Peace Corps. So I want to encourage our participants to look. Travis Tosto, the Colorado recruiter who's on the call, has put some links in regarding where people might find more information at thepeacecorps.gov. And as we wrap up, again, Dr. Olsen, I just want to say thank you so much. We'll just give it one more minute, see if we get any final questions. And Stan, if you can also, as my backup support, scroll through that chat, see if there are any questions that I have missed, please.
Okay, well, there was one early question here that I think is different. It says, has the newish application process where you apply to a particular country opportunity boosted recruitment? Or is that still a challenge? Have you noticed any change in the makeup of applicants as a result of the new process?
Okay, I can tell that probably the person who asked that question is one of any of us who applied for the Peace Corps when we just applied, and then we got an envelope that told us where we were going to go. And it was about 6 or 8 or 10 years ago that the process was changed so that you could select the country that you wanted to go to. And I'm going to give a quick story about it, and then I'll update us on where we are right now. But again, it seems like I only went to North Macedonia because all my examples have been from there. I want to tell you, I've been many places. But it was also at a luncheon there that I had I was talking to volunteers. Did you choose the country, or did Peace Corps choose the country for you? Because some say, no, I'll go anywhere. And I then asked them, and how do you feel about that experience? Well, what I found is that the answer of every volunteer there was the same. Oh, well, this is the country where I should be. I chose it. I knew I wanted to come to North Macedonia, or I thought I wanted to go to Ukraine and I couldn't go there. And so they said, do you want to go to Morocco or North Macedonia? And I thought that maybe North Macedonia would be fun. And she said, this was where I was supposed to be. So what we have discovered is that it really doesn't matter. And we guide people if, in fact, the country that they really want to go to is not going to be available, that we sort of nudge them around a little bit. And so let's say at this time, about half go to the countries that they want to go. Now, at this point in time, we are actually returning at the beginning to where you choose to go, particularly for the returning volunteers, that we try to ask them, where will you want to go, but are you open? Because we don't know which countries are going to open first. And so we're in the beginning asking people to return, and then we'll surprise you a little later when we know which country is going to be opening first. I know that we have our leadership from our recruitment, and I was wondering whether David or Mary Kate, whether you want to add anything to this answer.
Sure, Jody. Yeah, thank you for asking the question. Yeah, so basically it was late 2014. It was like the third or fourth quarter of the government's fiscal year when the Peace Corps made the choice to say, if a person's applying, he or she can say, yes, I would like to serve in this country. It doesn't guarantee you'll get accepted, but at least you have the choice. That and a couple other reasons did see quite a large increase in applications. It has proved to be very popular, though. Most recently it was like 73%, or almost 3/4 of applicants, during the normal cycle, not when we've, in the last 6 months, roughly 73% have applied to a specific country. All right. But most of the vast majority of them have also said, I'd like to serve in Morocco, for example, or Ukraine or Thailand. Those are typically the three most popular. But if they don't serve, for whatever reason, they don't get selected, they will serve, wherever they're needed most. And I think Ms. Olsen pointed out, roughly 50% go to the first choice country, but wherever they go, they typically do a very, very good job and represent the United States of America very well.
Thank you. We have another question about, in terms of benefits, rewards, and incentives to Peace Corps volunteers. Has there been any discussion about adding Peace Corps volunteers to the VA system?
Oh, interesting. No. That's an interesting question, because I remember in the 60s, I don't know if any of you served that long ago, but you could get a Peace Corps exam through the VA. But no, it's a very separate agency. We're an independent agency. And so our benefits are really created through Peace Corps itself. And let me just indicate what a couple of those benefits are. If there are continuing health issues that from being a Peace Corps volunteer, we have a whole FICA program that we work with Department of Labor to ensure that those resources are available for continued health support as needed. We have 120 universities that have graduate schools called the Coverdale Fellows Program that provide partial, at least some full, tuition reimbursement for returning volunteers to go to graduate school, which is really popular. And I haven't checked, but I'm guessing the universities in Colorado are definitely part of that program because they're part of just about everything we do. We also, as I said before, we have non-competitive eligibility for federal service. And so it means that you can come in effect, ahead of the line. You can come in without going through quite the normal process that most people in coming into federal service. And it has enabled returning volunteers, particularly for Department of State, USAID, the Foreign Commercial Corps, the Foreign Ag Corps, HHS, HRSA, EPA. We have many return volunteers that have had wonderful federal experience based on NCE. And we're finding too that 2 years of Peace Corps service, we talk about all the certifications that it helps you get. You can be volunteers who teach English as a foreign language. They can take an exam at the end of their 2 years and get certified as a TEFL teacher. And we draw out the M&E, the monitoring and evaluation work, and show that there's a lot of assets for getting a job and getting into graduate school that return Peace Corps volunteers have.
I see a question here related to the NCE program. So there's been a lot of efforts across the federal government to hire the evacuated Peace Corps volunteers, and this person's agency, HUD, has hired several. But wants to know, are there any efforts made to extend the NCA beyond the typical year because of the current circumstances?
Yes, I wish. We tried. We worked on it. It's pretty fancy and very difficult to make that change. We were able to get more people eligible who had to be evacuated. And in fact, we were able to help those rules so that you didn't have to serve for at least a year to be eligible. We tried very hard to get 3 years instead of 1 year, but we were not able to do that.
Deb, I have a question I've been dying to ask.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering, can you cite an example of someone overseas that during the history of the Peace Corps who was really empowered by the interaction with the Peace Corps volunteer, and that led to something wonderful for that country or for humanity?
Yes. An example, it goes back a few years, but an example, because I got to follow him and meet him many times, is Alexander Toledo, who was president of Peru. He lived with his 11 brothers and sisters in a 3-room small place outside of Lima. He ran into a Peace Corps volunteer that had just arrived in the mid-60s, invited her to move in with them, which she did. She got married at the end of year 1, and so her husband moved in too. And President Toledo and Dr. Toledo talked about what that 2-year experience was with the volunteer and her husband living with that family for 2 years. And then after those 2 years, they stayed with him. They sent him just little bits of money so that he could stay in school. They helped sponsor him to come to the United States for college. And he went on and got a doctorate in economics and became an internationally known economics leader before he went back to Peru to become president of Peru. So that's one example of the many of ministers who are doing health work because of what a Peace Corps volunteer did. And it is so enriching. We run into school headmasters who talk about the Peace Corps volunteer that helped them when they were a young student. I was talking to a nationally recognized, I'm sorry, I'm not remembering his name, from Central America, who was a very strong film, he does filming and documentaries. And he talked about his Peace Corps volunteer when he was 10 and how he and that Peace Corps volunteer have stayed friends through all these years later and supported each other in his documentary filming work. So these are just very quick examples, but there are thousands of them.
Thank you so much. Dr. Olsen, I know someone had asked how many evacuated people have applied to return, and David did respond that 2,394 recent evacuees have applied for reinstatement or re-enrolled as of just yesterday morning. So that is exciting news indeed. And again, we want to thank you. Stan, do you have any more questions? Or I think we may have just about run out of time. It's 4:05. Any last questions?
No, just that I was in the Foreign Service and worked internationally for 35 years or so. And, the Peace Corps volunteers are just extraordinarily represented in the highest levels of diplomacy, international education, and as executives overseas. So I can think of no other profession that has contributed more to international relations than the Peace Corps.
Well, thank you.
And thank you. Thank you, Dr. Olsen. Thank you to all the Peace Corps volunteers who joined us for this program. Thank you, Stan and Andy and Joe, all the work that you've put into programs and making this possible today. We will go ahead and sign off, but again, appreciate all the fantastic questions, and thank you to all of our Colorado Foothills World Affairs Council members for making this program possible. Have a great afternoon.